Chapter 282. The so-called foundation was the foundation for the survival of any force. For example, the Beihai province of the Wang family of Beihai. For example, heaven capital of the purgatory of heaven capital. For example, star state of the fantasy world. This was the strongest fortress of all the superpowers. The foundation meant resources, wealth, and rules that could be constantly cycled and perfected internally. In a sense, these could be said to be power. The superpowers in the dark world might not have an invincible realm expert in a special period, but their real base camp would always be as stable as Mount Tai. This was also the reason why the Samsara Palace had been excluded from the superpowers. The Master of Samsara Palace. The murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. The 12 Super Masters of Samsara. In terms of strength, the Samsara Palace was definitely not weak, but they had no foundation. Everyone, even any country, treated them very politely. This situation seemed prosperous, but once the master of Samsara Palace died, everything would completely disappear. Because they rose too fast, they were not mature enough internally, and they lacked strong support in the rear. But this situation was completely different for other forces. If Wang Tianzong suddenly died, any force in the dark world could not easily annex the Wang family of Beihai. At least Jianghu state would desperately protect Beihai province. Such support was what the Samsara Palace did not have, and it was what they had been pursuing. Deity was not surprised that Qin Weibai and the Samsara Palace wanted what they wanted. But he did not expect that the other party would have such a big appetite. Snow Country. The Polar Ground Alliance. Deity narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Weibai seriously, as if he wanted to see through her completely. Qin Weibai's eyes were indifferent and sharp, and finally became soft quietly. "What do you think, Your Highness?" Qin Weibai smiled and asked softly. "Your appetite is too big. I'm afraid you can't swallow it." Deity said slowly. "It's not difficult to seek victory in chaos and fish in troubled waters. It's just a foundation," Qin Weibai said calmly. She wore a dark blue cheongsam and stood in front of Deity, but she always had her own light and style. Deity's aura was ordinary and real. But Qin Weibai only had pure strength. It was not the strength of force, but the light of wisdom, calmness, and confidence. The appreciation in Deity's eyes became more obvious. "Are you sure it's Snow Country?" he asked with interest. "I think you know what it means to attack the Polar Ground Alliance." "Are you sure?" "Not at the moment. But we have time, we can slowly plan." Qin Weibai took the warm water that Flaming Fire handed to her and took a sip. She quietly looked at the snow outside the window. Deity was still looking at Qin Weibai. His eyes were filled with admiration and vigilance. He suddenly thought of the scenes when Jianghu State plotted against East Island. When did Jianghu State start to plot against East Island? In Deity's view, it wasn't the time for the elites of Jianghu State to arrive at Changdao. Instead, it was before. He still had to move forward. To be exact, it was when the master of Samsara Palace destroyed Night Spirit, went against Wang Tianzong, and challenged Gu Xingyun. The master of Samsara Palace fought against the god of war of Jianghu State. The impact was huge. As the neighbor of Jianghu State, East Island would definitely send someone to watch the ceremony and observe the strength of Gu Xingyun and the master of Samsara Palace. An invincible realm expert was naturally not very safe. He might be killed by Jianghu State. So East Island simply sent 2 superiors of the invincible realm. At the same time, East Island saw the opportunity. Once the master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun were both injured, Jianghu State would almost become the immediate interest of East Island. So before the 2 grandmasters of the invincible realm set off, a large number of elites of East Island sneaked into Jianghu State, which directly led to the weakness of East Island's local forces. And because of this, Jianghu State had the perfect precondition to plot against East Island. During that time, everyone thought that Samsara Palace was declaring force and trying to seek its own foundation. Jianghu State plotted against East Island, and many people interpreted that East Island was the target of Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace seemed to acquiesce to this statement. But in fact, the target of Samsara Palace was not East Island at all, but the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In this battle, the biggest goal of Samsara Palace was to become the Purgatory of Heaven capital. There were too many possibilities in the last few days of the 7-day agreement of Changdao. What really determined the final result was not Li Tianlan entering the invincible realm. It was not the sword between Wang Tianzong and deity. It was the 5th day before the final battle, when Wang Tianzong dealt with the border battle and the 5 superiors of the invincible realm who were trapped in Huading broke out of the encirclement. The master of Samsara Palace stood by and did nothing. This was the key of the key. Although the master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured at that time, she at least had the power to make a blow. With her strength, it was enough to completely suppress at least one superior of the invincible realm. In that case, the 5 superiors could not rush out of Huading. East Island would be in an extremely weak position. Jianghu State and the 5 superpowers would first join hands to destroy the special warfare system of East Island. Then, in the real final battle, there would be the Heaven Punishment Troop of the Wang family of Beihai. Samsara Palace would help Jianghu State. Even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital appeared, in that situation, deity could not stop the attack of the Wang family of Beihai, Jianghu State, and the 5 superpowers. But that night, the master of Samsara Palace, who still had the power to make a blow, did not make a move, which directly led to the almost inevitable reversal of the Battle of Changdao. This plan was too sophisticated. The blow of the master of Samsara Palace was the most important. Samsara Palace deliberately made an accident, which directly led to the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the fiasco of Jianghu State. Deity looked at Qin Weibai in front of him. His mind flew farther and farther away. After everything was settled, he heard from Daybreak that Saint had told him personally that the master of Samsara Palace had already used that strike. But deity still did not know where the blow landed. And deity also knew that the master of Samsara Palace was just an executor of such a huge plan with Jianghu State to plot against East Island. The military counselor was the so-called military counselor who was pushed out. The one who really controlled everything behind the scenes was actually the beautiful young woman in front of him. She needed the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. She needed the war on the border of Jianghu State. She needed Li Tianlan to be a hero. She needed Li Tianlan to make a big breakthrough. Everything happened without the slightest accident. It was as if everything had been prepared in advance, and it happened step by step in a prescribed order. Deity's body seemed to be infected by the howling wind and snow outside the window. It was a little cold. Cold. Because up to this point, this plan was actually only half a step forward. Deity did not see that such a plan would benefit the Samsara Palace. Instead, Jianghu State had now regarded the Samsara Palace as a hostile force. On the contrary, the Samsara Palace betrayed Jianghu State and helped the Purgatory of Heaven capital. And the rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, to some extent, was beneficial to Li Tianlan. But it was only beneficial to him. The so-called pursuit of the foundation of the Samsara Palace, at least in the Battle of Changdao, was a cover, or even a joke. They just wanted to help. And this time, Qin Weibai's plot against Snow Country also needed a foundation. But this time, who knew if she really needed it or if she also wanted to help? Deity took a deep breath. In his sight, Qin Weibai stood in front of him, with a faint smile. Gentle, tranquil, cold, with dreamlike perfection. But deity suddenly felt crazy. Under this perfect appearance, there seemed to be a crazy burning fire, beating fiercely and vigorously, blooming the most dazzling light in the dark world. When are you going to do it? Deity asked. It depends on the speed of your highness's development in East Island. Qin Weibai's tone was soft. It will take at least 2 or 3 years. During this period, the Purgatory of Heaven capital should be able to suppress Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace, and then give the Samsara Palace the greatest support. Now the Purgatory of Heaven capital had the full support of the Mikado, and Heaven capital had gradually become the center of the special warfare system of East Island. The strength of deity was also there. East Island was still in a sensitive period of turmoil. The right time, the right place, and the right people. Deity occupied extremely favorable conditions. In 2 or 3 years, it was enough for him to completely rise in East Island. Why Snow Country? There was a trace of unpredictable emotion in Deity's tone. To be exact, it's the Polar Ground Alliance. Qin Weibai said with a smile, this force is too powerful, and also too bloated. They are the Alliance, the guardian of Eastern Europe, not just the guardian of Snow Country. This is an opportunity for me. She took a step forward, and the high-heeled shoes hit the floor crisply. I will set off for Snow Country in a while. The scenery of Snow Country in the next few years may be very beautiful. Her eyes were as bright as the morning glow. The situation in Snow Country is very complicated. There is the Polar Ground Alliance, but don't forget the Wang family of Beihai. Some of the spies of the Wang family of Beihai in Snow Country are also very terrible. Are you sure that they won't notice? Deity shook his head, and his tone was not optimistic. So I need your highness to help me. It's good to temporarily attract their attention. Qin Weibai said, when I am in Snow Country, your highness can try to enter Zhongzhou state. Looking at Deity's frown, she paused and continued, of course, not inside Zhongzhou state, but the border. The border of Nanyun. Deity raised his eyebrows thoughtfully. In the border war, the Border Control Corps rushed into Annan state and drove 800 miles. That land is enough to be a small province. Zhongzhou state will definitely not return it to Annan state, but now it is not good to occupy it openly. It is just in the name of helping Annan state to suppress the rebellion. It is very good and has unlimited potential. If your highness doesn't take action, it will belong to the Wang family of Beihai in the future. Qin Weibai said softly. Deity thought for a moment, nodded and said, okay. We must send absolutely reliable people. Who do you want to go, your highness? Daybreak? Dawn? Phoenix? Qin Weibai asked calmly. Deity laughed and waved his hand with great pride. The 3 of them are really good. But Boss Qin, don't underestimate the purgatory of Heaven Capital. I have thousands of people who can be used. Qin Weibai lowered her head and said, oh. In a corner that Deity could not see, her eyes were crystal clear, shining and happy. In that case. Your highness, I'm leaving. Qin Weibai glanced at Deity and turned to leave. Where is Li Tianlan now? Deity suddenly asked. Qin Weibai was stunned. I don't know. She said softly. There was some longing in her eyes, and also some uneasiness and desolation. Deity nodded thoughtfully and said softly, I thought you knew everything. Boss Qin, what a wonderful woman you are. It's a pity that you are willing to follow such a man. Qin Weibai's somewhat blank eyes suddenly condensed. She looked at Deity in front of her and said flatly, in my eyes, he is the best. Your highness, even if you can be invincible in the world, Tianlan can still be thousands of times better than you. This seemed to be the first time that Qin Weibai showed such obvious aggression. Deity's eyes were a little complicated. He sneered and said, does he deserve it? I know the knot in your heart about him. Qin Weibai said coldly, but I am standing here now. I can represent the will of Samsara Palace. Your highness, if you don't want to be an enemy of Samsara Palace, then you must respect my man. Deity squinted at Qin Weibai. After a long time, he chuckled and said softly, I am willing to apologize. No need. Qin Weibai calmly turned around and said, goodbye. I don't know if anyone has told you that you are like a person. Deity looked at Qin Weibai's back and said slowly, but Boss Qin, I still advise you that you'd better think about yourself. No matter how good Li Tianlan is, he is not worth your help. Qin Weibai stopped, but she did not look back. She just said softly, I owe him. What do you owe him? If you really owe him, then you are an enemy. There was a trace of hostility between Deity's eyebrows, and his tone was cold. Qin Weibai's body shook slightly, and her face was a little pale. Deity did not notice this scene. He just said sincerely, "You are the woman who amazes me the most. I don't want to be your enemy one day. Whether we are enemies or friends depends on your attitude." Deity said calmly. Qin Weibai slowly stepped forward and said calmly, "Similarly, whether we are enemies or friends depends on the knot in your highness' heart." She walked down the stairs and went straight downstairs. Luxia Xianxia and Tianhai Wuji were still enjoying the snow in the hall downstairs. Seeing Qin Weibai in a cheongsam putting on a coat, Tianhai Wuji's eyes were burning with jealousy. She was the perfect goddess in his heart. But now, she belonged to someone else. He stared at Qin Weibai, and the name Li Tianlan came to mind. Qin Weibai suddenly turned around and looked at Tianhai Wuji. "If you look at me again, believe it or not, I will dig out your eyes," she said softly. Tianhai Wuji turned his head awkwardly, and his face was livid. Qin Weibai sneered and turned downstairs with flaming fire. They did not take the car arranged by the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Instead, they got in an Audi that seemed to have been waiting at the door. Horsewoman of the 12 super masters of Samsara sat in the driver's seat and started the car. "Boss, I found out." Horsewoman said respectfully, "Deity is often with Princess Ziyi, but there is no sign of pregnancy at present." She paused, and her eyes were a little strange. "I heard that in order to win over the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Mikado personally promised that if Ziyi had a child, she would become the crown prince of East Island in the future. But I don't know whether the news is true or not." "It's true," Qin Weibai said with a smile. "The crown prince of East Island will be the Mikado of East Island in the future." "It's crazy," Paladin said in disbelief. "Keep an eye on Ziyi." Qin Weibai leaned against the back of the chair tiredly and said softly, "I don't want her to get pregnant. If this really happens," she paused and said calmly, "then kill her." The knight's expression turned cold as he nodded. Qin Weibai turned her head to the north and gently raised the corner of her mouth. With her in snow country, the scenery in the next few years would indeed be very beautiful. Snow country with thousands of miles of snow was full of blood. Chapter 283. A journey without a destination is true freedom. East, west, south, and north. He could do whatever he wanted. This was a feeling that Li Tianlan had never experienced before. No worries, no fetters. He didn't have to look back because the way he came was far away, and he didn't have to be persistent because his purpose was unknown. Life was a journey. Li Tianlan was already on his way to a future that he didn't know and had never thought about. He passed by mountains and rivers. He passed by the downtown. Li Tianlan became more and more relaxed, both physically and mentally. It was a kind of freedom and leisure after letting go. It was forgetting and ignoring, and then it became pure. Without feelings, thoughts, or emotions, he became more and more focused and illusory. In the mountains and rivers, he was the mountains and rivers. In the downtown, he was the downtown. On the way to the world, he was the world. Only when one was really immersed in it would he find that both the mountains and the downtown had their own charm. The autumn rain after the Mid-Autumn Festival in Huading gradually faded away. He saw the falling leaves in the air in Wuxia. He saw the beautiful mountains and rivers in the Central Plains. He saw the cold dew and frost after a night in Dongshan. In the northern city, he looked at Yuzhou and heard the winter thunder. After passing by Yuzhou, he saw the first snow in Zhongzhou State this year in Liaodong. The journey was still moving forward. In front of him, behind him. Everything was so enchanting, so magnificent. Li Tianlan was deeply immersed in it. On his way, there was no magnificent general trend, no rising wind and surging clouds, only nature. Nature was the most beautiful. He began to become silent and quiet. Too many sceneries along the way were left behind by him, no matter whether he was willing or not. He didn't walk fast, but he never stopped his steps. From the Mid-Autumn Festival to the late winter, he walked thousands of kilometers. A white robe, a red sword, and a yellow dog. A silent and focused road, a pure and colorful life. He didn't know what year it was. He seemed to have forgotten martial arts. The Lin clan's famous sword, Divine Punishment, had been on his back, soaked with wind and frost, rain and snow. The scarlet long sword was stained with the color of the soil, mottled and no longer sharp. It was the first sunny day after the light snow in Liaodong. It was already snowing heavily in Guangdong. Li Tianlan finally realized that he was going north. All the way north. Snowflakes like goose feathers fluttered down in every corner, white and flawless. He continued to move forward. Taibai Mountain was in Guangdong. It would be on his way to becoming him, but it would not be his destination. He didn't have a destination, but now that he was here, he suddenly wanted to go to snow country and even go north. He liked snow. He liked the beauty and holiness of the world of ice and snow. Even if it was illusory, it still had a kind of enchanting charm. Under the heavy snow, Mount Taibai looked more and more misty. No one could see the city on the mountain. But in the vast snow, the entire Taibai mountain seemed to be sighing silently. Li Tianlan took out the badge that Tribulation gave him in Chengdao and put it on his chest. The badge was a piece of high-quality black jade. It was completely black, with only a thin white line running through the entire black jade, like a ray of light in the darkness. At the foot of the mountain stood a tall stone tablet. The stone tablet was engraved with the words, Military Restricted Zone, in bright red. Li Tianlan glanced at it and stepped up the mountain. The golden retriever wagged its tail and ran happily behind Li Tianlan. It was quiet and cold on the mountain road. Sai City must have arranged guards here, but perhaps because of the badge, no one came out to stop him. From the foot of the mountain to the mountainside, and then to the top. The wind and snow danced wildly. On the pale Taibai mountain, it seemed that even the snowflakes became cold and flamboyant. A figure finally appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. A man and a woman walked in the wind and snow. Li Tianlan only took a few steps, and the two had already appeared in front of him from a distance. Li Tianlan's face, which had been quiet and peaceful, finally showed a hint of a smile. He looked at the man in front of him. The man's face was still pale, but compared with a few months ago, his essence, qi, and spirit had begun to change subtly. Dressed in black, he stood on the snowy ground. His entire person was hidden like a snowflake, small and insignificant, but with an endless sharpness. Martial uncle. Li Tianlan bowed to Tribulation and said softly, "Long time no see. I heard from some spies at the foot of the mountain that a young man with a dog went up the mountain. I knew it was you, but I didn't expect you to come so late." Tribulation, who had returned from the Sky Academy, said in a calm tone, "Welcome home. I just passed by, so I came up to have a look." Li Tianlan's voice was soft and condensed in the wind and snow. He had reached the top of the mountain. But he could not see Sai City from here. It was said that the city was very beautiful, but for that city, he was a passerby rather than a returnee. Li Tianlan's eyes turned and fell on the woman beside Tribulation. It was a beautiful woman whose age could not be seen. Her age and appearance could not be seen. She wore a white robe, and the loose robe covered her plump and soft figure. Her long black hair was casually coiled behind her head, and a golden mask covered most of her face. Li Tianlan could only see her eyes and beautiful lips, which were flashing with complex expressions. The woman stood in front of Li Tianlan, but it seemed that she was standing on the horizon. It was not that she deliberately alienated him. But Li Tianlan's almost uncontrollable keen perception kept reminding him of the huge gap in strength between him and the other party. The first impression she gave Li Tianlan was that she was gentle and mysterious, but the most straightforward feeling was that she was powerful. It was not just pure sharpness. She was powerful in all aspects. Situ Tsanyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State and the governor of Sai City. Li Tianlan bowed deeply to the woman who had helped him a lot when he met her for the first time today. For a moment, he did not know what to say. Call her governor? It seemed too distant. But what else could he call her if not governor? Call me aunt. Situ Xianxia took the initiative to speak. Her voice was ethereal and pleasant, as soft as the snow on the mountain. Aunt. Li Tianlan called her in a strange way. Situ Xianxia nodded indifferently and said, "Let's go in and talk." No. Li Tianlan smiled and shook his head. His eyes were sincere. I came here just to see you and Marshal Uncle. Now that I've seen you, it's enough. He did not ask about Tribulation's injury. This was something that could be seen. Tribulation's injury was getting better, but he had not really recovered to his peak. You're not coming back? Situ Xianxia asked softly. Not going in and not coming back were two completely different meanings. Li Tianlan was suddenly moved, but he still insisted on shaking his head. He pointed to the front, which was the direction of Sai City. There is no freedom there. Sai City was beautiful. But there was a general trend there. It was not the general trend that he wanted, so there would be no freedom. Situ Xianxia fell silent. She looked at Li Tianlan seriously. This was the meeting she had been looking forward to for a long time, but she never thought it would be so hasty. She had not seen enough, and he was going to leave. Okay. Situ Xianxia nodded. What do you need? I'll ask someone to prepare it. No need. Li Tianlan smiled. In a few months, he had lost some weight and was taller. Now when he smiled, he had a natural and dazzling demeanor. I'm fine like this. Tianlan, Tribulation paused and said calmly, how are you recovering now? This was probably a question that everyone in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State knew. Even Li Tianlan himself wanted to know. So he shook his head and said softly, I don't know. The astonishment in Tribulation's eyes flashed away. There was a smile in Situ Xianxua's eyes. She looked at Li Tianlan and the model divine punishment behind him. Finally, her eyes fell on the cheerful golden retriever at Li Tianlan's feet. Situ Xianxua thought for a while and then whispered, if you don't want to come back, where do you want to go? North. Li Tianlan said. Snow country? Situ Xianxua raised her eyebrows slightly. She seemed to realize something, and her tone suddenly became dignified. Or do you want to go to the polar region? I haven't decided yet. Li Tianlan whispered, the scenery in the north is very good. I want to have a look. He faced the north. His way was in the north. Situ Xianxua nodded. Li Tianlan moved his feet. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something. He frowned slightly and hesitated. Just say what you want to say. As long as Sai City can do it. Situ Xianxua looked at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were beautiful and complicated. Aunt, Li Tianlan called her and said slowly, if I can. I want to see your martial arts. He had seen the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of tribulation. But he had never seen Situ Xianxua make a move. But this was very important to him. Situ Xianxua looked at Li Tianlan in surprise and nodded. Okay. Li Tianlan did not say thank you. Too many times, these 2 words seemed to be very weak. Situ Xianxua thought about it. She reached out her hand and stepped forward. In an instant, the cold wind on the top of Mount Taibai suddenly disappeared. Only the flying snowflakes were still floating in the air. Situ Xianxua moved forward again. Her body soared into the air. In silence, countless snowflakes followed her figure and went up against the wind. There seemed to be countless snow dragons on the top of Mount Taibai. Situ Xianxua spun in the heavy snow. Snowflakes danced around her. But the area around her had already become a pure void. That was Situ Xianxua's domain. It was not darkness, but light. The vast snow seemed to become light, covering everything. Situ Xianxua's figure also disappeared in a vast expanse. Whether it was the extreme darkness or the extreme light, once it reached the extreme, there was no difference in essence. Situ Xianxua's figure slowly fell. The light and the void converged, and a large number of snowflakes spread in all directions in an instant. The wind was whistling. Snowflakes swept over the mountains. Endless snow waves rushed up to the sky, messy and broken. Li Tianlan was silent. When I fight, the surrounding is my world and moves with me. Situ Tsanyue said calmly. It was Situ Tsanyue's world. Naturally, it was useless to the opponent. Useless heaven and earth. Li Tianlan nodded. There should be another move ahead. In this uselessness of heaven and earth, he saw too many familiar things. It's all-embracing collection. Situ Tsanyue nodded. There is also a half move behind, called immortality. All-embracing collection. All-embracing collection. Li Tianlan smiled and whispered, it changes, but it's still the 24 moves of sword. Situ Tsanyue did not speak. Li Tianlan waved his hand and went straight down the mountain. The golden retriever still followed him, shaking its head and wagging its tail. Tribulation looked at Li Tianlan's back and frowned slightly. Is he really going to the polar ground? Only in the most extreme environment can the most perfect breakthrough be made. Situ Tsanyue looked at Li Tianlan's back and whispered, as far as I know, many years ago, someone successfully broke through in the polar ground. He didn't start over, but directly broke through to the invincible realm. Who? Tribulation raised his eyebrows. He had been pursuing his own martial arts and didn't know much about these things. Chapter 284. Wang Tianzong was looking at the sea. The sea was turbulent. The sword intent around him seemed to be turbulent with the sea. Across the sea was snow country, which was also the direction Wang Tianzong was looking at. He had been standing here for nearly 24 hours. The sun rose and the moon set. The cold sea breeze whistled past. The black coat was fluttering vividly in the wind. Wang Tianzong was motionless, like a statue. Here was Beihai Province. Here was Mount Dibing. It was the highest place on Mount Dibing. Flowers and plants flourished all year round on Mount Dibing, but there was no bright color here. Rocks. Only rocks. The rock path from the bottom to the top connected to the stone platform at the top. After hundreds of years of wind and rain, countless rocks looked old and weathered. The highest stone platform was not large, with an area of hundreds of square meters. A stone tablet with a height of tens of meters stood at the highest point of the whole Mount Dibing, perfectly integrated with the surrounding rocks, looking hard and boundless. The sky was gloomy. The sea was gloomy. The ancient stone platform between the sky and the sea was getting darker. The sound of waves and the sea breeze whistled together. Wang Tianzong stood on the stone platform with a silent face. The scene was solemn. Solemnity was also a kind of hesitation. Wang Xingxiao slowly climbed the stone platform from the foot of the mountain and looked at his father in his sight. He did not speak, but first bowed to the tall stone tablet behind Wang Tianzong seriously, and then whispered, "Dad, Mom asked me to call you back. She made soup for you." "No." Wang Tianzong shook his head and said quietly, "I want to be alone." Wang Xingxiao was a little embarrassed and helpless. "Has your second uncle come back?" Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. "Yes." Wang Xingxiao was stunned. "He went up the mountain this morning. I heard that you were here, so I didn't come to bother you." Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said, "Call him here." Wang Xingxiao answered and took out his mobile phone to make a call. As the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong was different from other big shots in many aspects. The most different was that Wang Tianzong did not have his own study. In other words, his study did not have the significance of the existence of other studies. Wang Tianzong rarely read books and rarely reviewed documents in the study. He rarely talked with others in the study. He was also too lazy to stay in the study to think about life. That so-called study was just a decoration. Wang Tianzong preferred the current stone platform. This place had the peace he wanted, and also the glory he wanted. This was the forbidden area of the entire Mount Dibing, named the stage of formidable person. It was a place where all the ups and downs, glory and brilliance of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years were gathered. Wang Tianzong turned around and looked at the stone tablet in the center of the stage of formidable person. The stone tablet looked desolate under the gloomy sky. This was the famous stone of formidable person in the dark world. Countless names were carved on the stone of formidable person. Some of the names had already dimmed, but they still shone brightly in the long river of history. There were many names, but compared to the stone of formidable person, they only occupied a small portion. Some of the names on it were ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai, some were pioneers of Jianghu state, some were invincible figures in the dark world, and some were giants in business and politics. The ancestors of the Lin clan were also there. The seniors of the Li family were also there. For hundreds of years, those who had made great contributions to the Wang family of Beihai were all on it. Glory, pride, romance, prosperity, all the lights of the Wang family of Beihai were gathered here. Wang Tianzong gently stroked the stone tablet in front of him. His expression was affectionate with sincere awe. The waves hit the stage of formidable person. On the stage of formidable person, the contemporary hero of the Wang family of Beihai faced the stone of formidable person. It was like facing the past today. Each was lonely. The future of the Wang family of Beihai will be yours after all. Wang Tianzong didn't look back and said softly, "You have to shoulder the future of the Wang family of Beihai." Wang Xianxia rarely saw his father like this. He nodded and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, father. Li Tianlan refused me. So I brought Yue Tong back." Wang Tianzong sighed softly with undisguised regret. If he agreed to come to Mount Dibing, in the future, in the dark world, in the next decades, who will be your opponent? Wang Xianxia didn't say anything. His mind was always calm, so he didn't have any hostility when mentioning Li Tianlan. But hearing this name, Wang Xianxia always thought of the day in Chengdao when he bowed in front of Li Tianlan. His eyes were calm, and he said softly, "We are opponents." Opponent? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. "You have no opponent, at least not now. Who knows where Li Tianlan is? If he doesn't show up, you have no opponent. If he shows up, you may not be his opponent." Wang Xianxia raised his eyebrows. He was a little dissatisfied, but he didn't dare to say anything. The entire Wang family of Beihai had a headache because of Li Tianlan's disappearance recently. Although Wang Xianxia rarely left the Wang family of Beihai, he had a clear view of the overall situation of Jianghu state. Li Tianlan became famous after the battle in Heaven Capital. His resurrection greatly stimulated the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. So the two sides cooperated to promote the reform of the special warfare system of Jianghu state. The Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters was the result of the reform. But now the reform had taken place, and Li Tianlan disappeared. In this way, although both Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai gained a lot of benefits because of the reform, the relationship between the two sides seemed to become subtle after they lost the target that they could target. A few months had passed. Although the Southeast Special Warfare Headquarters had been established, the follow-up action had to be temporarily put on hold for various reasons. There were also different voices inside the Wang family of Beihai. The special warfare system began to become chaotic. Now his father asked him to call second uncle over, probably to talk about these things. "Dad, after the spring festival, if I have nothing to do, I want to go out for a walk." Wang Xianxia was silent for a while and said softly. He was now in the thunder-shocking realm. Although he had just broken through the realm for less than a year, his combat capability was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and he was not even an individual expert a half-step to the invincible realm. In this special and sensitive period, Wang Xianxia needed to pursue his own path, find the most suitable martial arts for himself, and prepare for breaking through to the invincible realm in the future. "You are the future of the Wang family of Beihai. Now I'm here, you can go if you want." Wang Tianzong said softly. Wang Xianxia nodded. In his sight, Wang Xiaoyao's figure had appeared on the stage of formidable person. He called second uncle. Wang Xiaoyao nodded. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said, "Brother. What's the matter?" "The patriarch of the Lolita family is dead," Wang Tianzong said. Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Xingxiao were stunned at the same time. This news was not a secret. In the past 2 days, it had spread all over the world. But the two did not expect that Wang Tianzong's first sentence was not domestic, but abroad. The Lolita family was a wealthy family in Snow Country and one of the energy oligarchs in Snow Country. It was powerful. Similarly, this family was also an important part of the Polar Ground Alliance. The Polar Ground Alliance was an alliance. Its internal structure was not like that of other forces. On the contrary, it was a loose but extremely large organization. The Lolita family could be said to be an extremely important node in the Polar Ground Alliance. However, Wang Xiaoyao was a little annoyed. "I know this news. It is said that they seized power internally, and the method is very clean. It seems to have nothing to do with us, right? The method is very clean?" Wang Tianzong smiled. "Maybe there is a cleaner method that we can't see." He glanced at Wang Xiaoyao and suddenly said, "What do you think of the Samsara Palace?" The Samsara Palace. Wang Xiaoyao was a little hesitant, a little sad, and a little missing. For a moment, he could not speak. "Because you used to please Qin Weibai, we have cooperated with the Samsara Palace several times. So we can roughly figure out some forces in the Samsara Palace. And from behind these forces, we can roughly see some of Qin Weibai's methods." Wang Tianzong thought of Qin Weibai's beautiful face and sighed softly. He was even old enough to be Qin Weibai's father, so he did not think about beauty. He just marveled at her methods. It could be said that she was the most peculiar woman he had ever seen in his life. If she was willing to marry Xiaoyao. What a pity, what a pity. "Brother, do you suspect that little Bai is behind the Lolita family's affairs?" Wang Xiaoyao frowned. "I can't see her or anyone's shadow. It happens so quickly and cleanly, so cleanly that it makes people uneasy," Wang Tianzong said softly. He now controlled several subordinate families of the Samsara Palace. Coincidentally, those families had experienced a great change similar to the seizure of power a few years ago. Everything looked clean, but afterward, no one knew that they had joined the Samsara Palace. Listening to the thunder in silence. This method was too quiet and clean. The Lolita family, which had been very stable in recent years, suddenly did this. He had to be vigilant. But, even if the Samsara Palace takes action against the Polar Ground Alliance, it has nothing to do with us. The Samsara Palace is cooperating with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Wang Tianzong interrupted Wang Xiaoyao. The Purgatory of Heaven capital occupies East Island. If the Samsara Palace takes Snow Country, what will the Wang family of Beihai do? Wang Xiaoyao was stunned, and his face changed dramatically. The Purgatory of Heaven capital occupied East Island. If the Samsara Palace took Snow Country, the Wang family of Beihai was right between East Island and Snow Country. At that time, if the two superpowers declared war on the Wang family of Beihai at the same time, it seemed that both Snow Country and East Island had reasons to support the two superpowers. What a big trap. Wake up. Wang Tianzong looked at Wang Xiaoyao. "We will not be friends. You must be clear about this. Neither the Purgatory of Heaven capital nor the Samsara Palace are friends for us." Not friends. Naturally, they were enemies. Wang Xiaoyao's face was complicated. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Wang Tianzong knew what he wanted to ask, but he didn't answer. From the moment he saw Deity's sword in Heaven capital, he knew that he and the Purgatory of Heaven capital were not friends. It was also on that night. In that cold and decisive sword light, he also recognized the sword of the master of Samsara Palace. So Wang Tianzong also knew that he and the Samsara Palace would not be friends. Wang Tianzong really regretted that Li Tianlan refused the Wang family of Beihai. Not only for himself, but also for Li Tianlan himself. The heavenly son of Zhongzhou state would eventually become a tragedy. Wang Tianzong's eyes were full of mockery. The Wang family of Beihai. The Li family. Kunlun City. There was nothing noble or despicable about it. Everyone wanted something, so they would naturally take action. Is there any news about Li Tianlan? Wang Tianzong asked. Since Li Tianlan left Huading, the Wang family of Beihai had always attached great importance to tracking him. But there was still no exact information. Wang Xiaoyao shook his head and whispered, "I'm still looking for him." Wang Tianzong agreed and suddenly said thoughtfully, "How is Ning Ziyuan doing recently?" Wang Xiaoyao's eyes narrowed and he looked up at Wang Tianzong. Ning Ziyuan, commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State. One of the core figures of the Southeast Group. Recently, there had been voices in the Southeast Group asking the group to accept the Li family again and restore the time when the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family coexisted. Some influential people also vaguely expressed their opinions. And Ning Ziyuan was one of the louder voices among these people. No one was surprised by his attitude. Because Ning Ziyuan was promoted by the father and son of the Li family. Only Wang Tianzong was surprised. Because his attitude was too normal, it seemed abnormal in his eyes. Not bad. Wang Xiaoyao replied cautiously, "Brother, don't worry. I will persuade him." Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Wang Xiaoyao, nodded, and said, "3 things recently. First, summarize all the information about Snow Country in detail and increase the investment in Snow Country. Second, find Li Tianlan. Third, inform Tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance and invite him to visit the Wang family of Beihai." Wang Xiaoyao nodded and suddenly said, "Brother Yuetong, I'll tell her in person." Wang Tianzong waved his hand expressionlessly. Wang Xiaoyao said no more and walked down the stage a formidable person with Wang Xingxiao. Wang Tianzong didn't look at Snow Country anymore. He stood in front of the stone of formidable person, reached out, and gently touched the huge stone with too many meanings in front of him. It was silent. Wang Xingxiao looked back on the way down the mountain. The stone of formidable person in his sight was very big. His father's figure was very small. He watched his father reach out and touch the stone tablet. It was a kind of careful caution and awe emanating from his bones. Perhaps only the Sword Emperor standing on the stage of formidable person was the real Sword Emperor. Wang Xingxiao watched quietly. On the stage of formidable person, the Sword Emperor took off the invincible halo. What was revealed was fear, cowardice, carefulness, prudence, and hesitation. For the first time, Wang Xingxiao felt the weight on his shoulders. He suddenly remembered his father in his memory. It seemed that as long as he could remember, Wang Tianzong had never smiled much in his impression. He had always been calm and silent. One person, one sword, he carried the entire Wang family of Beihai on his weak shoulders and sprinted to the top. That position was too high. The road to the top was a dangerous one with no way out. He couldn't retreat, because behind him were tens of millions of people of Beihai province, hundreds of thousands of troops of Beihai province, and the rise and fall of the entire Wang family of Beihai. He couldn't retreat, and he didn't dare to retreat. So he was invincible, but he rarely really relaxed. Under the invincible halo, he was not high-spirited, free, or doing whatever he wanted. He was really cautious, even timid. The scenery at the top of the world might be wonderful. But he was not complacent. Chapter 285. New Year's Eve was coming. It snowed heavily in Beihai province. Auspicious snow heralded a bumper harvest. The falling snowflakes seemed to fade away on Mount Dibbing. Mount Dibbing was pure white, holy, and elegant. It was still snowing. Wang Yuetong stood on the wide balcony and looked at the dancing snowflakes outside, lost in thought. In the middle of the year, she had made an appointment with several good friends to go skiing in the Celestial and Human Canyon in Kanglan City. But those friends had never contacted her since she came back. Mount Dibbing was near Xingzhou, the capital of Beihai province. Wang Yuetong had returned to the Wang family of Beihai from Huading for a few months. She hadn't even been to Shenzhou. How could she have the mood to go skiing in Kanglan City hundreds of miles away? Wang Yuetong became more and more silent. She never went down the mountain and seldom went out. After coming back from Huading, she seemed to have completely closed herself up. Without any entertainment activities, she meditated and cultivated in silence every day. When she was tired, she watched a movie, rested, slept, and ate. Day after day. Everyone knew that the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai had returned to Mount Dibing, but few people could see her. The lights in the exquisite palace where she lived were on. That seemed to be the only difference between before and after the little princess came back. Autumn and winter were alternating. Winter was about to pass. Wang Yuetong was still quiet and still silent. The most delicate flower of the Wang family of Beihai had bloomed in every corner of Mount Dibing, but now she chose to bloom in her own space. She had never withered, but she was a little more proud and stubborn than before. That was her struggle. Although she knew early on that there would be no result. The cold wind poured into the balcony from the open window and rushed into the room. The hazy gauze curtain in the room danced with the cold wind. Wang Yuetong faced the wind and snow. Her fresh and refined little face was more attractive. A beautiful young woman in her early 30s walked into the room and looked at Wang Yuetong, who was wearing thin clothes on the balcony. She sighed, took a coat from the wardrobe, walked over, and put it on Wang Yuetong. She said helplessly, "Wicked girl, no matter how dissatisfied you are, you can't make fun of your health, can you? If you catch a cold, I will take care of you. Your father has been very busy recently. I think he has almost forgotten about us. Do you still expect him to feel sorry for you?" The young woman was extremely beautiful, with a mature and enchanting figure. The charm of a woman was vividly reflected in her. She was wearing light-colored cotton pajamas, and her hair was playing. Standing in front of Wang Yuetong without makeup, she looked like a pair of sisters. But in reality, they were mother and daughter. "Mom, I've entered the fire-flaming realm. I won't catch a cold even if it's a little cold." Wang Yuetong looked at her mother in front of her and said in an intimate tone, "I don't understand your profound martial arts." The woman smiled, and there was an indescribable gentleness in her smile. "The weather is cold, and it's not good to wear too little. I've made some soup, come and have a bowl." Wang Yuetong said. Just as she was about to turn around, the woman chuckled. That heartless man is here. Go and welcome him." Wang Yuetong turned around subconsciously. In his sight, Wang Tianzong's calm and silent figure was stepping on the wind and snow all over the sky and had already arrived outside the hall. Beside him was a young man about 25 or 26 years old. The young man looked ordinary, but he looked gentle and elegant. Wang Yuetong seemed to suddenly understand something. Her face was a little pale, and she suddenly felt cold. "I won't go." Wang Yuetong bit her red lips hard. Her face was as white and transparent as the snow outside. The woman looked at her daughter's stubborn and aggrieved face, and then looked at the young man beside her husband outside the hall. She shook her head and said softly, "Maybe it's not what you think. Anyway, I have to go and have a look." Wang Yuetong just shook her head and said nothing. The woman reached out her hand and gently touched Wang Yuetong's hair. Her tone was softer. "In fact, even if it's what you think, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That young man is your Uncle Wu's son. Don't you trust your father's judgment? I haven't seen the boy named Li Tianlan, but I have a vague impression of him from what you said these days and the rumors outside. He's the most outstanding young man in Zhongzhou State today, isn't he? It's normal that you like him. But since your father objects to you two being together, he must have his reasons." The woman's eyes were soft and calm. "Tong Tong, you should believe your father. The person he chooses may not be the best, but he must be the most suitable for you. Based on your father's character, it's impossible for him to hand you over simply for interests. Now there is no one in the world who deserves this. I just want senior brother Tianlan." Wang Yuetong shook her head, looking stubborn. The woman chuckled as if she was looking at a shameless child. But senior brother Tianlan isn't yours. No one can deny his excellence, but for you, he's really not a good match. The descendant of the Li family, this identity can represent too many things. Nowadays, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State is the era of Kunlun City. No matter how strong the Li family was back then, 20 years is enough to change everything. In fact, Li Tianlan's excellence is what worries me the most. People who are too outstanding will not be willing to be ordinary. He carries too many things on his back and has such a talent, so from the beginning, he won't have a way out. He has to keep moving forward and reverse the general trend alone. In such a process, no matter whether he wins or loses, it will be too tragic. He may gain a lot, but he is also destined to lose a lot. It's magnificent. Ups and downs, turbulent winds and scudding clouds, these may be very good words for men, but for women, happiness and stability are the most important. Not to mention that Li Tianlan is still on the opposite side of us, even if he is willing to join the Wang family of Beihai. In my heart, I actually don't want you to be with him. She looked at her daughter in a trance and muttered to herself, the more beautiful the women around the giants are, the more sad they are. Mom, are you talking about yourself? Wang Yuetong looked at the woman's eyes and asked. The woman was stunned and then chuckled. Of course not. Although your father is also a giant, the Wang family of Beihai doesn't have to go against the general trend. He may be under a lot of pressure, but he has never lost his temper with me. We don't have to worry about survival. Why should I be sad? But Li Tianlan is different. If he wants to survive, he has to go against the trend. You may be glorious by his side, but you won't be happy. You won't understand. Wang Yuetong whispered, the Wang family of Beihai has been in a high position these years. It's so high that even I can see too many things clearly. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen the so-called forbearance of those who sacrifice their loved ones for the sake of interests, and the so-called sacrifice of those who would rather abandon their wives and children for survival. I've seen too many. And Tianlan. Her eyes were a little dazed. He was the first man I met who would stand behind me when I was in danger. She chuckled. And at that time, he already knew my identity. My identity was not friendly to him, but even so, he still stood in front of me. That's because you had never been in danger before. The woman didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If you were in danger, too many people would be willing to do so. It's different. Wang Yuetong said quietly, because at that time, he knew very well that even if he helped me block the danger, he would not get any benefits. When the woman was about to speak, the voice of Wang Tianzong, who had been pressing the doorbell for a long time, rang directly from outside the hall. He said calmly and indifferently, "Summer solstice, open the door." The woman responded subconsciously. She touched her daughter's hair and turned to go downstairs. Wang Yuetong bit her lip tightly. Her eyes looked out of the door, as if she had suddenly made up her mind. She put on her coat and went downstairs. In the living room on the first floor of the hall, Wang Tianzong had walked in with a young man. Summer Solstice was talking to the young man with a chuckle. Wang Tianzong was about to go upstairs. He saw Wang Yuetong coming down. He subconsciously froze. Dad. Wang Yuetong took the initiative to greet him. Wang Tianzong's facial muscles softened a little. He nodded and said, "Come down." Wang Yuetong followed Wang Tianzong with a calm face. The young man chatting with Summer Solstice with a respectful face also stood up. Seeing Wang Yuetong, who was still beautiful without any makeup, his eyes obviously brightened. Then he smiled and said, "Yuetong, long time no see. I'm Wu Qiong. When I was a child, I often took you to Xingzhou to play." "I know." Wang Yuetong nodded with a chuckle. "Brother Wu, I heard that you went to Star State for further study? Did you just go home?" "Yes." Wu Qiong smiled and looked emotional. "I haven't been back for almost 10 years. Little Wu won't leave this time. I will arrange a position for him in Xingzhou in the near future. Yuetong, you are all young people. You should communicate more in the future. Wang Tianzong whispered, your Uncle Wu has been looking forward to you being his daughter-in-law. He has said this for many years. I saw little Wu a few days ago. He is really a good kid. Uncle, you flatter me. Wu Qiong quickly bowed. Wang Yuetong looked at Wu Qiong. Her eyes were quiet. The Wu family was one of the rich families in Beihai. Wu Qiong's father was Wu Qiu. He was not famous in the dark world, but in terms of strength, he was definitely the top expert in the Wang family of Beihai. He controlled the internal security forces on Mount Dibing and could be said to be Wang Tianzong's most trusted right-hand man. Wang Yuetong also had a good impression of Uncle Wu. But she had never thought about being Uncle Wu's daughter-in-law. Although she had heard such jokes many times. Father, do you mean, to unite with the Wu family by marriage? Wang Yuetong asked straightforwardly. It's not a marriage. Wang Tianzong frowned. Wu Qiong is good. You can try to date him for a period of time. If, there is no if. Wang Yuetong said indifferently, I won't marry into the Wu family, so there is no need to try. It could be imagined how embarrassing it was to say this directly in front of the person involved. Wu Qiong's face turned red and he couldn't speak for a while. Why? Tong, don't be too capricious. Summer solstice sat aside and wanted to smooth things over. But Wang Yuetong had made up her mind to make a big scene. Why? She asked in reply and then looked directly at Wu Qiong. Brother Wu, do you want to know why? Wu Qiong's face turned red, but he still insisted on nodding. It was a great honor for the whole Wu family to be able to marry the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. How could he accept it? Because here. Wang Yuetong pointed to her mouth and chuckled. Her mouth was small, red, and soft. Wang Yuetong's smile was beautiful and enchanting. Because I have eaten from senior brother Tianlan. Her face was blushing, but her eyes were unusually brave. She thought for a moment and described, it's that I am naked and kneeling in front of him, and then. I have eaten from there. She was confused. Wu Qiong was confused. Summer solstice was confused. Wang Tianzong was confused, too. The three of them stared at Wang Yuetong, who was blushing but talking happily. For a moment, they didn't know how to react. Anyway, I have eaten from there, in the Sky Academy. Wang Yuetong looked at Wu Qiong. That's the reason. I have eaten from senior brother Tianlan, so my mouth can't say, I love you, or, I want to other men. Because I want to be shameless. Chapter 286. After leaving Sai City, Snow Country was less than 500 kilometers away. Snow Country was magnificent. In winter, snow fell continuously. The weather was cold and the ground was frozen. Everywhere was desolate and quiet. All the way north. Li Tianlan's footsteps finally began to slow down. At the border of Snow Country, he began his first meditation since he set out. In the whistling wind and snow, he meditated for 16 hours. Li Tianlan's figure seemed to completely disappear from the world and became completely illusory. Li Tianlan became more and more silent. He shuttled through the primeval forest at the border between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country. There were only trees and wind and snow in front of him. The world was quiet. Silence was freedom. The golden retriever named Baby grew up every day. The icy and snowy environment didn't seem to bother it at all. It followed Li Tianlan all the time, carefree and natural. The golden retriever was the only person Li Tianlan could talk to. But Li Tianlan talked less and less. He was so quiet that he seemed to be integrated with the coldness of Snow Country. Thousands of words and ambitions before departure disappeared bit by bit. Silence. Silence. Concentration. Pure. Watching the flying snow and listening to the cold wind. He meditated for longer and longer periods of time, and more frequently. Most of the time every day, Li Tianlan would sit in the forest and explore his martial arts. The primeval forest was lush with trees. The snow outside stopped and began to fall again. Whether it stopped or fell. Because a lot of snow had accumulated on the trunks of the forest, the snowflakes in the forest were falling all day long. The snowflakes fell from the trees and drowned Li Tianlan in meditation. So most of the time every day, there would be a snowman sitting quietly beside the golden retriever, silent and motionless. There was not much food in the forest in winter, but as long as he looked for it, there would always be food. When not meditating, Li Tianlan was a hunter. Rabbits in winter were generally easy to catch. The man and the dog ate a lot of rabbit meat, and Li Tianlan's barbecue skills gradually became better. He began to try to train the golden retriever. It was indeed a very intelligent dog. A good pet dog was gradually trained by him into a hunting dog. Maybe it was not qualified, but the golden retriever had learned to catch some relatively easy small animals in winter. So Li Tianlan changed from a hunter to a chef. The golden retriever gave the prey to Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan processed it and ate it. Meditation. Moving forward. Cooking, survival. There were also times when the golden retriever didn't get anything. That day, the man and the dog could only starve. The beginning of winter passed, and soon, it was deep winter. The man was thin, and so was the dog. But for the first time, a trace of illusory sword intent appeared on Li Tianlan. It was as if he was born with a sword intent that had perfectly integrated with his entire body, similar to his temperament. Li Tianlan walked slower and slower. He still did not draw his sword. The famous sword, Heavenly Punishment, had been hanging on his back all this time. It had been eroded by the wind and snow, looking even more ancient. Li Tianlan occasionally stroked the hilt and scabbard, but he never thought of pulling them out. Because the sound of the sword being drawn was too loud. Because the sword light was too bright. Li Tianlan wanted silence. The snowstorm in the primeval forest seemed to have become a part of his life. This kind of peace was like heaven to him. A man and a dog spent their first spring festival in the primeval forest of Guangbao. There were no lights or hustle and bustle. Li Tianlan, who had thrown away his phone, could not get any information from the outside world. New Year's Eve. On the day of reunion. What he faced was only the snowstorm that filled the forest. He started a fire in the most primitive way in the forest. The orange-red flames swayed in the surrounding snow, bringing with them smoke and dust. The fire illuminated Li Tianlan's face. The surrounding forest was still hazy and dark in the snow. The grown-up golden retriever lay between Li Tianlan and the fire, wagging its tail. Its furry tail swept on Li Tianlan's calf. So lonely, so quiet, so enjoyable. The sword intent seemed to gradually light up in the fire. He gently stroked the head of the golden retriever. The fire burned and then went out. From New Year's Eve to New Year's. Li Tianlan, who was already 20 years old, stepped out of the primeval forest of snow country with the dog. To the north. Continued to the north. He rarely stayed in the cities of snow country. Many of his supplies were even replenished in the small towns near the urban area. Winter had passed. But all the way to the north, the weather in snow country was getting colder and colder. Li Tianlan still did not drive. He just walked step by step on the journey of tens of thousands of miles. He was not pursuing. He was just walking on his own lonely road. That was his cultivation. It was still snowing in the spring in the center of snow country. It was snowing heavily. It was nearly 40 degrees below zero in spring. In the flying snow, Li Tianlan took off his shoes and stepped barefoot in the snow. The golden retriever ran happily around him. Li Tianlan's eyes were always calm and firm. The snow was very cold. But every step he took, Li Tianlan could feel the power. The power of the earth. Snow country was vast. The endless flying snow finally stopped. Li Tianlan saw the surging and towering rivers and mountains of snow country, and the flowing sea. He walked behind time. So spring had passed. Snow country entered the cool midsummer. Li Tianlan's meditation time decreased from long to short. He was still dressed in white, walking barefoot on the land of snow country. The white clothes made of cloud silk were not dirty or faded at all. They were still as clear and bright as before. The beard at the corner of Li Tianlan's mouth was getting longer and longer, and the beard on his chin was hanging down, dark. His hair covered the back of his head and began to fall to his shoulders. He still carried divine punishment on his back. The famous sword that carried the sword intent of the ancestors of Xianyuan and the masters of the Lin clan began to tremble on his back. Li Tianlan's world once again heard the sound of the long sword clanging. He approached the desert of snow country. He also stopped in the desert of snow country for the time being. He stopped by the Volga River in snow country. So the golden retriever began to eat fish. It could even go into the water to catch fish. The long sword on Li Tianlan's back trembled every day, but he didn't seem to notice it. He just soaked his calloused feet in the water every day and looked up at the sky. The sky of snow country was very clear. It was a natural magnificence. The golden retriever began to move farther and farther away from Li Tianlan and no longer stuck to him. Its eyes occasionally showed humanized fear. It often stared at the long sword on Li Tianlan's back and occasionally barked in a low voice. The summer began to pass. The bleak autumn day made people feel more lonely in snow country. The golden retriever, who had eaten too much fish and wanted to vomit, bit Li Tianlan's sleeve with its mouth many times. Li Tianlan finally stopped being in a daze by the river. He prepared enough clean water, crossed the Volga River, and directly entered the desert of snow country on a sunny day. The white robe disappeared in the vast expanse of yellow sand. The storm began to enter the desert. Divine punishment on Li Tianlan's back became completely quiet and no longer trembled. After the sandstorm, the barren desert became even quieter. The scenery was the same. A person who never changes. A dog that never changes. Li Tianlan's eyes became completely clear. He was not in a daze, nor was he meditating. He was getting faster and faster. The golden retriever seemed to be unable to stand the sometimes hot and sometimes cold yellow sand in the desert. Its pace was a little staggered and became listless. Li Tianlan simply wrapped the golden retriever's limbs with gauze. Finally, he simply carried it on his back and continued to move forward. He stepped barefoot in the yellow sand with a deep and firm sense of strength. A deep line of footprints was left in the quiet desert, spreading far and wide. A gale gradually rose in the desert. The yellow sand that seemed to wreak havoc in the whole world flew wildly in the desert. The wind rose and fell. The yellow sand fell. The deep footprints that spread out in the desert were still there, clear and deep, without any change. At the end of the desert was the grassland of snow country. Cattle and sheep were everywhere. His short hair had become long. Li Tianlan, whose short beard had become long, finally stopped being silent. He still didn't talk much, but he occasionally chatted with the golden retriever. During the journey of tens of thousands of miles, the man and the dog had already developed a deep relationship. Although the intelligent golden retriever couldn't speak, it often responded to Li Tianlan with its actions. So the loneliness gradually faded away. A smile appeared on Li Tianlan's face. The illusory sword intent surrounded him and completely became his own temperament, making him seem to have a sense of alienation from the whole world. But he smiled happily. Behind this focused and pure smile, he seemed to forget something. Or in other words, he didn't want to think about it for the time being. The grassland deep in snow country was bitterly cold. In this environment where they didn't have to worry about food and supplies, the man and the dog became more and more energetic. In the coldness that could almost obliterate everything, Li Tianlan and the golden retriever spent the second New Year's Eve in the cold wind. A trace of white gradually appeared in the distant sky of the night. That was not the dawn of the new year. It was the glacier. That was the color of the polar region. Li Tianlan led the dog and continued to move forward. The polar region in the north was not a continent. It was the sea. And there were countless islands covered by glaciers. The new year began to pass gradually. Spring was coming. Li Tianlan's world became dark. There was no more sunshine. There was only night and the cold moon all day long. It was the polar night in the polar region. For a few months, it would be shrouded in darkness 24 hours a day. Li Tianlan and the golden retriever arrived at the seaside of the Arctic Ocean. The glacier was in sight. It was the closest one to him. The seawater rose and fell under Li Tianlan's feet. Li Tianlan looked at the glacier in the distance silently. In the night, the man, the dog, and the sword were quiet. They were all extreme. He reached out his hand, pointed at the glacier in the night, and whispered, "Baby, let's go and have a look." The golden retriever whimpered and seemed to understand Li Tianlan's words. It went around to Li Tianlan's back and jumped directly on his back. It was next to the divine punishment. The divine punishment was silent, not sharp, and not cold. Li Tianlan stepped forward. His footsteps stepped on the water, causing irregular ripples. He was very fast. He walked farther and farther on the sea, deeper and deeper. The waves rolled and fluctuated under his feet. Li Tianlan moved forward with a calm face. He walked on the sea. He walked on the sea. He let the waves roll, neither sinking nor rising. The polar night in the Arctic Ocean was still the same. The darkness seemed to be endless. Li Tianlan walked silently. He walked from the border of Jianghu state to the prosperous Huading, and finally shone his most dazzling light in heaven capital. All the lights seemed to have faded away into the past. It had been nearly 2 years. Chapter 287. He floated along with the waves like a wanderer without any direction. Li Tianlan really didn't need directions. What he needed was silence. Whether it was freezing cold or scorching hot, whether it was hell or heaven, peace was enough. Only the quietest environment could temper the purest and most focused willpower. That was the power he needed, and it would also become his unbreakable martial arts foundation. In the polar region of the polar night, it was dark day and night. Time had lost its meaning. Li Tianlan, who had completely let go of everything, passed by the glacier and walked on the sea like a ghost, ethereal and illusory. The polar region was rich in resources. Resources meant benefits. Therefore, the edge of the polar region was not as deserted as imagined. Every country had its own workstation. Regardless of whether it was the polar day or the polar night, the edge of the polar region was always noisy. He continued to move forward. In the darkness, in his world, the lights of the workstation began to fade away, disappear, and finally disappear completely. A lonely and cold glacier. Deep darkness. The biting cold wind and snow. This was Li Tianlan's path. He walked quietly, as if he would walk until the end of time. The polar region was huge. In a world of ice and snow, there was an endless sea and undulating glaciers. Li Tianlan didn't know how long he had been walking. His world was getting quieter and quieter. Wind, snow, and glaciers gradually became everything. The darkness of the polar night began to dissipate. The sun rose and the moon set in the polar region, and the day and night alternated. Li Tianlan boarded an island covered with glaciers. His footsteps finally stopped. It wasn't that he didn't want to move forward. This was the first time his body had a problem after walking for thousands of miles. A sharp pain engulfed his entire body without warning. It was as if his body, which had long been assimilated by the surrounding cold temperature, began to feel the extreme cold. Pain coursed through his body. Li Tianlan clearly felt that his body was becoming stiff little by little. The severe pain and coldness tore at his body as if they wanted to crush every inch of his flesh and blood. He fell shivering on the glittering and gloomy glacier. There was only a fully grown golden retriever by his side. He subconsciously held the golden retriever in his arms. The golden retriever meekly curled up in his arms and occasionally licked his face. His spirit gradually became absent-minded in the pain, but Li Tianlan gritted his teeth and held on. His condition was not good enough for him to hunt for food in the polar regions. The man and the dog could only starve. His body temperature began to decrease. But Li Tianlan gradually felt the heat. It was as if the coldness originated from within his body. The glacier in his body seemed to have completely melted, and then turned into an erupting volcano. A high temperature was brewing in his body. The pain became numb in the heat. Li Tianlan began to feel itchy. That kind of crazy itch seemed to seep out from the bones, first his legs, then his arms. His limbs felt like there were countless ants crawling under his skin. Li Tianlan, who had been maintaining a trace of clarity, completely collapsed in the shortest time possible. There was only silence in the polar region. Only his unbearable roar reverberated across the glacier. He rolled and struggled on the thick layer of ice, his clean fingers stabbing into the thick layer of ice. Helpless howls filled with despair echoed across the desolate glacier, occasionally accompanied by the barking of a dog. His limbs felt as if they were about to be completely crippled. The indescribable pain and itch were constantly eroding his nerves. Li Tianlan exhausted his remaining strength and fell into a coma on the glacier. The sun rose and the moon set. This was the warmest time in the polar region. The average temperature was about 10 degrees below zero. But this was also the most desperate time for Li Tianlan since he set off. Li Tianlan gradually woke up from his coma. He didn't know how long he had been in a coma. The strange pain and itch in his limbs still existed, but it had faded a lot. He felt hunger. The hunger of near death gnawed at his nerves. The golden retriever was lying next to him, and it seemed to be on the verge of death. Li Tianlan felt weak all over, which was even more tragic and weak than when his foundation was completely destroyed. He struggled to get up, dragged the golden retriever to a place sheltered from the wind, and then almost killed a polar reindeer nearby. When he dragged the reindeer back, the golden retriever had some spirit, but it still looked sick. Li Tianlan, who was about to collapse, pointed to his prey. He really had no strength to make a fire. The man and the dog barely dealt with the reindeer's body and directly ate the raw meat. The raw meat and blood, with the unique coldness of the polar region, were swallowed by him. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but his sight was already spinning. He seemed to have been hungry for a long time. Piece after piece of bloody venison was eaten by him. Taste. Indescribable taste. He only knew to replenish the energy for survival. In a trance, the pain and itch in his limbs seemed to fade as he ate. Li Tianlan ate more and more. The man and the dog almost ate up the whole reindeer. Li Tianlan fainted again. The moonlight on the horizon gradually disappeared. The sun rose and never set again. The polar region began to enter the polar day. There was sunshine over the Arctic Ocean day and night. The sun was bright and cold. Li Tianlan, who woke up again, began to be in a daze again. The feeling of weakness in his body had completely disappeared. The changes that were enough to kill people in just a few days began to fade away. Li Tianlan finally understood that it was not illness. It was an unimaginable wealth. Or a treasure. Under the sun, a smile gradually appeared in his calm eyes. The smile overflowed from his eyes, spread at the corners of his mouth, and became more and more obvious. He laughed out loud. The clear laughter kept echoing in the ice glacier. Li Tianlan's eyes seemed to contain amazing divine light. Until this moment, he really saw his own path. The path that could lead him all the way to the end of martial arts. He was not moving forward. On the glacier where he lived, he smashed the thick ice with his bare hands and dug a simple house that was not big but big enough for him and the golden retriever to take shelter from the wind. The house was full of prey. Polar reindeer. Polar bear. Polar wolf. There were also some special fish in the sea. Li Tianlan became more and more peaceful. It was just that when he did these things, his eyes would always flash with a strange and bright light. The polar day gradually passed. Another spring festival was coming. The polar region, where the temperature dropped to the freezing point again, ushered in a snowstorm. For the first time, Li Tianlan's palm held divine punishment on his back. Divine punishment was still scarlet as yesterday. The long sword was slightly wide and straight. However, compared to the past, it seemed to lack a lot of the heavy and sharp feeling. Divine punishment was very light. As light as a feather. Li Tianlan still did not draw the sword. In the boundless darkness of the polar night, the snowstorm was howling fiercely. Li Tianlan walked into the snowstorm and began to wield divine punishment with its scabbard. The golden retriever was gnawing the roasted meat in the house that Li Tianlan dug, whimpering happily. Li Tianlan was waving the sword. His movements were slow. It looked clumsy. The scarlet sword with its scabbard cut through the fierce snowstorm, with a dull whine. Li Tianlan did not use his strength, but explored the sword intent that had long been engraved in his bones with the smallest effort. That was the 24 moves of sword. The first blade Wuji. The second blade Lingxi. The third blade Annihilation. The fourth blade Violent Thunder. The fifth blade Flying Snow. The sixth blade, until the 23rd blade. There was only half a move in the 24 moves of sword. Li Tianlan simply skipped that half move and started from the first blade again, repeating the cycle. His movements became lighter and lighter, as if he was waving divine punishment in his hand at will. But the sword intent in the snowstorm gradually became clear. One after another, the sword intents merged perfectly in the snowstorm. Li Tianlan's movements began to speed up. The first blade was still the first blade, but it seemed to have become something else. All the sword intent began to change. The perfect circulation of sword intent was torn into pieces by Li Tianlan and was in a mess. All the sword intent finally shattered and disappeared. Only the snowstorm was still howling, as if mocking something. Li Tianlan calmly withdrew the sword. Meditation, rest, and waving the sword. The darkness in the polar sun was unchanged. The spring festival had passed. Li Tianlan's sword intent became more and more chaotic. The first blade was not like the first blade, and the absolute sword was not the absolute sword. It was so chaotic that it was even ridiculous. But Li Tianlan was not discouraged. He saw the road that only belonged to him. It was so clear that there was no reason to give up. What was the invincible realm? That was the extreme sublimation of the 4 realms of martial arts. Every invincible realm expert had his own martial arts philosophy. They might be superior to others in the same realm, but in their own philosophy, they were definitely the strongest. That was the invincible realm in the traditional sense. It was the invincible realm, not the invincible realm. Any inheritance station was the path that the ancestors had walked. Looking down from the perspective of the invincible realm, the inheritance was the starting point. Different inheritances meant different levels of starting points. There were too many amazing geniuses and successors of top inheritances, but they were stuck in the half-step invincible realm. Because to move up in this realm, what was needed was one's own faith and the tempering of martial arts. That was the process of abandoning the inheritance to pursue the true self. One step further and the world would be wide open. One step back and disappear into the crowd. Or even beyond redemption. After the thunder-shocking realm, any genius who aspired to the invincible realm would choose to temper his martial arts. And the 4 realms of martial arts were the most direct ladder for them to seek the true self. Qi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking. In order to find their own martial arts, they would keep trying and tempering. This process might last 5 years, 10 years, or even a lifetime. The Wang family of Beihai had the inheritance of Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation. The Li family had the inheritance of Map of God of War. But every invincible realm expert from these 2 forces was unique. Wang Tianzong's sword of 6 paths of reincarnation would definitely be different from that of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Honghe and Li Guangtu's 24 moves of sword would also be different. Li Tianlan was also tempering his martial arts now. But he no longer needed the so-called 4 realms of martial arts. He didn't temper his own realm, but his sword. His own sword. In the polar night of the polar region, his sword intent was getting more and more chaotic. The time for him to swing his sword was getting less and less. The polar night was still enveloping the sky. Li Tianlan was still swinging his sword. The chaotic sword intent was constantly entangled in the cold polar region. Li Tianlan was getting calmer and calmer. His sword intent was still chaotic, but the sword intent it carried was getting less and less. The sword intent began to disappear bit by bit as he swung his sword. When Li Tianlan swung his sword again, there was no sword intent in the polar region. Wherever the long sword passed, there was nothing. Li Tianlan himself was stunned. He put away divine punishment, sat on the glacier, and looked up at the night. The golden retriever came to him and rubbed his arm. "We should go." Li Tianlan touched the golden retriever's head and whispered. There was no longer any scenery worthy of his nostalgia. Because there was no sword intent here. On this day, the polar region was still dark. On this day, it was the 2nd day of February in the Jianghu state calendar. The dragon raised its head. Li Tianlan looked down at divine punishment in his hand. He held the hilt with his palm. The whole divine punishment began to shake violently. Li Tianlan's eyes were as calm as water. He pulled out the famous sword of the Lin clan little by little. "Thank you," he said softly. There was no sword intent in divine punishment. The sword intent accumulated for hundreds of years had completely disappeared. The blade was completely out of the sheath. The cold wind blew over. Crack, divine punishment, which had existed for hundreds of years, shook. With the cold wind, dense cracks appeared on the scarlet and heavy long sword. Li Tianlan loosened his hand. Divine punishment fell down. Before it landed, it began to disintegrate in the cold wind. The metal fragments fluttered in the air as if they were weightless. In front of Li Tianlan's eyes, they became invisible dust in the wind. There was no more divine punishment in the world. Li Tianlan stood up. In the night wind, the invisible sword intent surged under the night sky like mountains and seas. The whole glacier began to shake wildly. Li Tianlan carried the golden retriever on his back. A bright white dress directly broke through the shaking polar night and went straight into the sky. The glacier below was silently cut open, and the thick ice fell into the sea. The invisible sword intent poured directly into the sea from the sky. In the huge waves, the polar night in the polar region lit up. Chapter 288. Li Tianlan boarded a cargo ship heading directly from the polar region to Jianghu state. This wasn't too difficult of a task. From Jianghu state to snow country to the polar ground. Li Tianlan didn't have a passport, so he was a stowaway. But the return trip was very simple. He didn't have a passport, but he had the highest badge of Sai City. The polar region was rich in resources. Whether it was the South Pole or the North Pole, the major forces would more or less establish strongholds. So did Sai City. His badge was enough for the people of Sai City in the polar region to arrange a return route for him as soon as possible. It was easy and discreet enough. The land and sea were calm. The freighter gradually moved away from the Arctic Ocean. The glaciers and coldness were fading away, and the climate began to warm up. Li Tianlan and the golden retriever, who had long been accustomed to the cold, were not used to it. From the polar region back to Jianghu state, they took the northeast sea route, starting from the Arctic Ocean, passing through the Pacific Ocean, and finally entering the Yellow Sea, arriving at Qingdao in Dongshan province of Jianghu state. In 1 month, they had traveled more than 6,000 kilometers. The tenacious golden retriever began to jump around after the first few days. After living in the snow country and the extreme low for nearly 3 years, it was not easy to survive. Now that they were finally in a normal environment, the golden retriever immediately felt like a husky. Li Tianlan spent most of his time on the ship in a daze. He didn't get seasick, but he didn't really like the environment around him except for seawater. What he missed was this feeling. The ship sailed on the sea. Behind him was the glacier, and in front of him was the golden age. Behind him was freedom, and in front of him were fetters. Most of the time, he would stand on the deck and look at the way he came. The cargo ship sailed forward. The stern of the ship drew a clear white wave. There were no glaciers in sight, and the weather was no longer cold. Li Tianlan was finally sure that the so-called freedom was really far away from him. All the worries, conspiracies, swords, deceptions, and turbulent times in the bustling city were getting closer and closer to him. He began to miss the quietness on the glacier. He knew very well that if there were no accidents in this life, the past few years would be the only relaxing time in his life. That year, Li Tianlan was 22 years old. He already had the ability to shoulder more responsibilities. Freedom was good, but that was not his life. Li Tianlan looked up at the sky. He shaved off his already long beard and briefly combed his hair, revealing a clean and warm face. The sky was filled with the glow of sunset. The clouds were illuminated by the setting sun into a fiery red color, and the gorgeous light and shadow were projected on the endless sea. Under the setting sun, there was no wind or waves. It was a beautiful scene. He suddenly remembered a saying. When I first met the world, when I was a teenager, Li Tianlan laughed. Under the sky and in the setting sun when he was 22 years old, his laughter was ignorant and nostalgic. The golden retriever circled around him. Li Tianlan opened his hands. The big dog pounced on him. Li Tianlan gently stroked the soft fur of the golden retriever and looked at the deep sea with a calm face. There was no sword in his hand. But his arms exuded a power that seemed to be able to overturn the entire sea. Li Tianlan began to recall. He thought of the Li family, the remaining uncles of the Li family, the East Emperor Palace, Li Beidian and Ning Qiansheng, the Samsara Palace, Sai City, Tribulation and Sititsanyue, the Dongqing clan, Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian. Something seemed to have been forgotten. Li Tianlan knew that he hadn't forgotten. He just kept silent and didn't want to think about it. He also thought of the divine punishment that was broken into pieces and blown into dust by the wind in the polar region. Li Tianlan's eyes were surrounded by sword light. There was no sword in his hand. At this moment, Li Tianlan knew where he should go. The human emperor was broken in heaven capital. Divine punishment was broken in the polar region. He needed a new weapon, a powerful one. In May, the Pacific Ocean was cool and hot. Li Tianlan's mind had completely flown back to Jianghu state. Because of the final battle in heaven capital, the official opening time of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy was delayed for several months, from early spring to early autumn. This year was the third year. It was also the graduation year of the Sky Academy. If the official opening time began in early autumn, then the last maneuver of the two academies should be from the end of June to the beginning of July. Li Tianlan was just in time for this maneuver. That would be the starting point of the East Emperor Palace. In the future, whether the East Emperor Palace would be completely integrated into the system or become a free force, the final maneuver of the two academies would be a threshold that could not be bypassed. After that, Li Tianlan would face the great pressure brought to him by Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai in Jianghu State. He just didn't know how his grandfather was. The old master's physical condition directly determined whether Li Tianlan would face a narrow escape or a certain death in Jianghu State. He touched the palm of the golden retriever subconsciously a little harder. The golden retriever whimpered and shook its head hard in Li Tianlan's arms. Li Tianlan was shocked and subconsciously let go. The golden retriever looked at him innocently and seemed to be a little wronged. "I'm sorry." Li Tianlan smiled apologetically. "I'll ask Senior Yu to cook a delicious meal for you when we go back." He used to be the chef of the Hidden Dragon Sea. "I'll let you enjoy the treatment of the giants of Jianghu State." The golden retriever wanted to rub against him again. Li Tianlan pressed it down casually. Looking at the setting sun in the sky, he stood up from the deck and said, "Let's go back." He had a separate room on the ship. Sai City arranged everything very well. The captain, who seemed to have a clean background, seemed to be one of them. They specially prepared cigarettes and a small amount of wine for him. 3 meals a day were also specially sent to him. It was standard VIP treatment. Li Tianlan was not dissatisfied with it. But after drifting on the sea for a long time, his desire to return to Zhongzhou state began to become more and more urgent. The cargo ship became quieter at night. The golden retriever lay on Li Tianlan's bed. Li Tianlan sat at the head of the bed and meditated. His meditation now was closer to thinking. Because his will was already perfect, under the situation of absolute focus, his path became increasingly clear. 3 years. In the cold wind and snow all over the sky, Li Tianlan couldn't tell how much he had gotten, but he knew he had gotten a lot. The most perfect embryonic form of martial arts, the most intangible sword intent, and the strongest body. The 3 years after the great breakthrough were not wasted. Instead, everything became absolutely perfect. Li Tianlan began to fade the traces of the 24 moves of sword in his mind. He was exploring his own martial Tao, and also his own sword intent. He had come to this point on his road, and he no longer wanted the different 24 moves of sword. Just like what he said to Situ Tsanyue on the top of Mount Taibai 3 years ago. No matter how different it was, the 24 moves of sword was still the 24 moves of sword. What he wanted was his own sword intent. The martial arts that belonged only to him. The night gradually passed. The starry sky on the sea, which was far more brilliant than on land, disappeared quietly when the morning light came. There was light outside, but the sky was gloomy. Li Tianlan woke up from meditation and encountered the first storm since he boarded the ship. The sky on the rain. The sea under the rain. In the raging wind, the sky and the sea were shaking at the same time. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the surface of the sea during the day seemed to have entered the polar night. The endless sea under the dark clouds looked desperate black. The heavy rain drifted down, and huge waves rushed to the deck with the wind. The cargo ship, which was not small, was shaking in the wind and rain. Thunder sounded one after another. The golden retriever was no longer by Li Tianlan's side. Instead, it went to the corner of the room. Li Tianlan stood steadily on the deck, looking at the boiling and extremely fierce deep sea. His eyes were shining, and his whole body was surrounded by the illusory but domineering sword intent. The rain was crushed around him. Li Tianlan stood there without feeling anything, quietly looking at the irresistible deep sea that seemed to be in a rage. The storm came and went quickly. The dark clouds were blown away by the wind. The rain was still. The warm sunshine soon shone on the sea again, and there was a sparkling light in sight. Li Tianlan, whose clothes were still dry and fresh, looked into the distance. There was a brilliance in the distant sky. A colorful rainbow bridge across the sea suddenly appeared on the calm sea. The color was so clear. It was far away, but it seemed to be within reach. Li Tianlan was in a trance. He looked deeply into the distance. The rainbow seemed to be getting closer. There was an island floating in the air. The islands appeared in the air in pieces, becoming clearer and clearer, like a continent floating in the air. The continuous islands floated between the rainbows. Antique palaces, flowers and jungles covering the archipelago, people on the islands, everything appeared clearly in his sight. There seemed to be a layer of mist separating the islands from the deep sea, making everything look far away and close. The rainbow was dazzling. The islands became clearer and clearer. In the rainbow, it was the rarest mirage of the sea after the rain. Li Tianlan was completely fascinated. An exquisite figure appeared clearly in his line of sight. She stood above the tallest palace on the island, seeming to overlook the deep sea or the horizon. The sea breeze blew her hair. She wore a red dress, and her long hair and skirt fluttered at the same time. Li Tianlan seemed to have smelled the delicate fragrance that haunted his dreams but dared not think about. He looked at her quietly, his eyes unblinking. You are the moonlight pouring down at night. You are the clouds floating in the sky. You are the most touching fragrance in the world. That was Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was in the rainbow, in the mirage. Such a perfect and unparalleled Qin Weibai. The indifference, stubbornness, and persistence in Li Tianlan's heart completely disappeared in an instant. He thought about the reunion between them in the future. But he never thought that it would be such a reunion. They were thousands of miles apart between the sky and the sea. The light refracted a large area of the island and Qin Weibai. The cruelest and the most gentle. Li Tianlan's figure subconsciously rushed out of the deck and rose high into the sky. The sword intent that was completely out of control was boiling in the sea. A huge wave as high as 100 meters suddenly rose in front of the freighter. The sword intent was swirling in the sea. The huge wave was getting higher and higher. In the sea, a mountain seemed to rise in front of the freighter. Li Tianlan stood on the huge wave and kept rising. He looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai couldn't see him. Such a reunion. The huge wave was still rising. The mirage was getting farther and farther away. Standing between the rainbows, she was also getting more and more illusory. This was the distance. Between him and her, even if it could topple mountains and overturn seas, it couldn't reach. Chapter 289. Li Tianlan still didn't know where Qin Weibai was. He wasn't even sure if what the mirage reflected in front of him was the real scene and how far it was from him. The illusory mirage began to disappear. The cloud-like figure gradually dimmed. Li Tianlan returned to the deck. He watched everything disappear in front of him, but there was nothing he could do. The sky cleared up after the rain. The rainbow in the sky became clearer. All the sailors and the captain of the cargo ship respected Li Tianlan like a god. It was no secret that there were 4 realms of martial arts and absolute masters in the world. But how many people had seen a force that was close to the power of heaven to set off a 1,000-meter-high wave in the vast deep sea with his own power? Under everyone's careful service, the cargo ship gradually sailed out of the Pacific Ocean and into the Yellow Sea. In the following days, Li Tianlan never left the deck. He kept looking at the direction where the mirage disappeared. But the sea was no longer gloomy, and there was no heavy rain. Naturally, there was no mirage that he had been longing for. In the middle of June, the cargo ship entered Dongshan province of Jianghu state. It docked at Qingdao in the evening. The sound of water faded away. Li Tianlan walked out of the dock with golden retriever. The hustle and bustle of Jianghu state came to him in an instant. The wind and snow in the polar region were dissipating. The mirage was dissolving. The sword intent began to fall silent. Li Tianlan's eyes were in a trance. He looked at Jianghu state, which he had left for 3 years, as if a lifetime had passed. It's good that you're back. A voice suddenly sounded in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan came to his senses. Without a sound, a figure in black had already appeared in front of him. Black casual clothes, black casual pants, casual leather shoes, short hair, and a pale but slightly delicate face. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and he said, "Martial uncle, you're really becoming more and more modern." Tribulation's appearance was far younger than his actual age. He looked like a young man less than 30 years old. Now his outfit made him look a few years younger. Li Tianlan remembered the black robe and silver mask when he first met Tribulation. The unparalleled shadow formula, the forceful and domineering stop formula, and the sharp and cold kill formula. At that time, Tribulation was a mysterious and powerful death hidden under the black robe and silver mask. But now, although it was not the first time he had seen such a Tribulation, he still couldn't accept it. Sai City no longer needs to hide behind snow mountains and masks. Tribulation's tone was indifferent. It's meaningless. Li Tianlan fell silent. Sai City had always stood aloof from worldly affairs. Every top assassin wore a mask and rarely competed with other forces in the country for any resources. They just lived quietly on the snow-covered mountain top under the mask. But as he became the young governor of Sai City, everything would change completely. Tribulation coughed softly and wiped the corner of his mouth with his fingers calmly. Li Tianlan vaguely saw a trace of red. His heart suddenly sank. Looking at Tribulation's pale face, he asked, "The jade seal is useless?" "It works." Tribulation glanced at him, waved his hand and said, "Let's talk in the car." From Sai City to Zither Island, Tribulation came to pick up Li Tianlan alone, without even bringing a driver. Li Tianlan put the golden retriever in the back seat and sat in the passenger seat. Looking at Tribulation's pale face, he asked in a deep voice, "Martial uncle, what's going on?" Tribulation went straight into the invincible realm in Heaven Capital. It had been 3 years now. He couldn't imagine how serious the injury was that Tribulation hadn't fully recovered in 3 years under the influence of the Imperial Jade Seal's massive luck. "I'm much better than before you left." Tribulation drove away from the dock and said calmly, "But the injury was so severe that the luck in the Jade Seal could only slowly neutralize my injury. Unless I can make a big breakthrough and start over like you, I can only endure it." He paused and laughed at himself. "At my age, how can I have the qualification to start over?" Li Tianlan looked at Tribulation seriously. Tribulation was the strongest assassin in the dark world. Now that his injury had recovered a little and his breath was restrained, Li Tianlan couldn't see any clue. "So now," he asked softly. "Invincible realm." There was no expression on Tribulation's face. "It's almost the same as before the breakthrough. I'm injured and can only exert about half of my strength, but I should not be worse than Gu Qianchuan." Gu Qianchuan was the first elder of Kunlun City and was not worse than him. It sounded good, but he was the most amazing assassin in the dark world. It was not bad that he had recovered to this extent, but it was definitely not good news. "What about you?" Tribulation handed Li Tianlan a cigarette and suddenly asked, "In 3 years, how is the recovery from Huading to the polar region, which is tens of thousands of miles?" Li Tianlan took the cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath, feeling the long-lost taste of tobacco and the dizziness in his brain. He thought about it carefully and said softly, "Still outside the invincible realm." His martial arts had no 4 realms of martial arts, only sword intent. Sword intent was not invincible, which meant he was outside the invincible realm. Without a life-and-death fight, Li Tianlan didn't know what his current combat strength was. Tribulation took a deep look at him and said softly, "Let's go back first." Li Tianlan hesitated for 2 or 3 seconds and finally shook his head. He whispered, "Martial uncle, I won't go to Mount Taibai." Tribulation subconsciously slowed down the car. He went to see Li Tianlan. As a result, the golden retriever in the back row rushed over and blocked Li Tianlan's expression with a huge dog head. "Why?" Tribulation asked. Li Tianlan didn't speak. It was not that he didn't like Mount Taibai, but Situ Xianxia gave him a very complicated feeling. The hidden god of Zhongzhou state did not have any malice, but in Li Tianlan's feeling, the other party's kindness did not seem to be for him or even for the Li family. 3 years ago, he saw Situ Xianxia on Mount Taibai. Situ Xianxia looked at him as if she was looking at another person. Li Tianlan knew who she was looking at. But he didn't like this feeling and didn't know how to face that kind of gaze. "My sister has been collecting news about Snow Country and the polar region in recent years. Although she didn't say it, she secretly went to Snow Country once, but she didn't find you. There are not many people in Sai City, but you haven't met all of them. Everyone wants to see how the young governor is after the great victory. Secretary Bai went to Mount Taibai almost every month to ask about you in recent years. She cried every time. She was very sad. I never knew that the strong woman in politics could be so fragile." Li Tianlan knew that Tribulation was talking about Bai Qingqian, Dongcheng Wudi's wife. Li Tianlan had never thought of her for 3 years. They only met once and didn't talk much. He thought he should have forgotten her long ago. But now when he heard Tribulation mention her again, Li Tianlan had a feeling that he couldn't breathe. That feeling was not oppressive, but strange. Go to Luojing, Zhongyuan. Li Tianlan interrupted Tribulation and said in a low voice. Tribulation said no more and drove in another direction in silence. At the same time, he changed the topic and said, Dongqing Wudi has been promoted. In the years you were away, the relationship between the academics and the giant group was not affected. He went to Yuzhou last year. The army headquarters? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. The Border Control Corps had a saying in Zhongzhou State that the Border Control Corps was a small army headquarters. The commander of the Border Control Corps went to the capital and competed for the position of the army headquarters. If he went to any other place, it could be said that he was promoted in public but demoted in private. Tribulation said, he took over Qi Baitsong's position. Qi Baitsong retired last year. Li Tianlan said, he knew Qi Baitsong, the flag figure of the Special Warfare Group. In the past few years, he had been the backbone to check and balance President Li Huaqing's military power. He retired so smoothly that Dongqing Wudi became the nominal number 2 in the military of Zhongzhou State, but actually the number 1 in the military. This was somewhat unexpected. As Dongqing Wudi changed from a member of the decision-making committee to a director and became a real giant, the giant group's right to speak in Zhongzhou State would be greatly enhanced. In this matter, the Wang family of Beihai also contributed. The Dongqing clan never made a losing deal. In the border war 3 years ago, the Border Control Corps penetrated 800 miles into the territory of Annan State. That land, together with the elites of the Border Control Corps, was handed over by the Dongqing clan to the Wang family of Beihai in exchange for the support of the Wang family of Beihai to Dongqing Wudi. Now the situation in Zhongzhou State is a bit chaotic. You came back at the right time. Li Tianlan silently thought about the impact of the change at the top level on him and suddenly said, who will take over the Border Control Corps? For the time being, Dongqing Wudi is the commander of the army. The position is a bit difficult to produce. As for who will be in charge, it depends on the next transaction of the major groups. Tribulation's tone was indifferent. But his words were enough to make Li Tianlan realize the great changes that had happened and were about to happen in Zhongzhou State. He narrowed his eyes and said no more. It was night when they got off the boat from Qin Island. When they arrived at Luojing, it was close to midnight. Although Tribulation had informed the Dongqing clan in advance, when the car drove to the mountain occupied by the Dongqing clan, Tribulation and Li Tianlan couldn't help but be a little surprised. Before going up the mountain road, Dongqing Hongguang, the old patriarch of the Dongqing clan, was standing there with his butler, motionless. No one knew how long they had been waiting. Tribulation was surprised. Li Tianlan felt ridiculous and even a little scared. He didn't think he was qualified to let the spiritual leader of the giant group wait for him at the foot of the mountain overnight. Old Master. Li Tianlan quickly got out of the car and held Dongqing Hongguang's hand with both hands. The Dongqing clan really couldn't find any fault with him. Li Tianlan was moved and had nothing to say for a while. Son, it's good that you're back. Wudi was going to come back, but there was a temporary meeting. When he came, it would be dawn. Dongqing Hongguang smiled and patted Li Tianlan's palm. His eyes were a little tired, but full of kindness. Rushi is already on the way. You came faster than I thought. Thank you. Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Hongguang and said in a dry voice. Thank you. Don't say it too early. Dongqing Hongguang smiled and said, there is a bigger surprise to come. He looked at Tribulation standing beside Li Tianlan and said with a smile, Your Highness, you've worked hard. Tribulation shook his head. He was in the invincible realm, but in front of Li Tianlan, he was only willing to be a deputy governor standing beside the young governor. Old Master, do you mean that the thing that the Dongqing clan has been researching in recent years has been successful? Tribulation asked. Dongqing Hongguang laughed and said, 2 months ago, it was successfully completed. Tianlan, you came back just in time. 3 years ago, Senior Li sent the murderous weapon, the Legend of Qin, and you asked Woody to send the fragments of the Li family's murderous weapon. Today, I give you a real murderous weapon. It may not be the strongest, but it's definitely the most suitable for you. Li Tianlan's eyes lit up. A new weapon. This was the main purpose of his coming to Zhongyuan. Where is it? He asked subconsciously. Not here. Dongxing Hongguang smiled and said, in the secret laboratory in Spirit Treasure City. I'll take you there now. But Tianlan, the person who used the Legend of Qin to create a new murderous weapon, is my nephew. His lifelong wish is to create a real murderous weapon. The previous Mad Strike and Sky Attack were made by him, but they were far less powerful than the murderous weapon. Until he saw the Legend of Qin this time, he simply devoted all his attention to it. In 3 years, he was too ashamed to say that he created a new murderous weapon, but now the one in Spirit Treasure City has indeed replaced the Legend of Qin, so... He hesitated and said, he wants to name your weapon. It was definitely an honor in the dark world to name a murderous weapon that could be handed down for hundreds of thousands of years. No problem. It's a small matter. Li Tianlan answered without hesitation. He didn't care about the name of the weapon at all. The human emperor of divine punishment sounded domineering, but in fact, he didn't mind even if it was called grass or wildflower. If it's a small matter, Tianlan, how about you promise me something big? Dongxing Hongguang glanced at Li Tianlan and said with a chuckle. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Thinking of the engagement, he coughed and said, what do you want me to promise? It's not what you're worried about. Dongxing Hongguang laughed and scolded. He did want to mention it, but after hearing Li Tianlan's words, he simply changed the topic and said, I couldn't find you in the past few years. Now that you're here, how about you come back this Mid-Autumn Festival and spend the Mid-Autumn Festival together? The Mid-Autumn Festival was the day of reunion. The old man had been longing for the real reunion for many years. Li Tianlan hesitated a little and then shook his head. Dongxing Hongguang's eyes were dim and puzzled. If Li Tianlan didn't come back, then Bai Qingqian, who hadn't come back for many years, wouldn't come back either. How could they reunite? Why? Dongxing Hongguang asked softly. Old master. Li Tianlan gave a wry smile and shook his head, saying, the Mid-Autumn Festival and New Year's Eve have nothing to do with me since I was born. In the place where I live, the Li family doesn't celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival. The Mid-Autumn Festival, New Year's Eve, and the Lantern Festival, these traditional festivals had nothing to do with the Li family as long as Li Tianlan could remember. For ordinary people, it might be very festive. But for the Li family, such festivals were only painful. So the Li family never celebrated the Mid-Autumn Festival. It was just New Year's Eve. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.